At my 32nd birthday dinner, my mother leaned over her expensive steak and whispered to my father, "While everyone is here, tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment." I watched my brother nod and slip away from the table. They thought they were kicking me out onto the street. 1 hour later, my brother returned paler than the linen tablecloth, shaking as he whispered, "Mom, there are armed federal guards at her door." He had no idea the apartment he was trying to break into no longer belonged to me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member who tried to ruin your life. Let me take you back to how this entire disaster started. I am Maya, 32 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life building a real estate empire my family knows absolutely nothing about. The scene of the crime was an exclusive, ridiculously overpriced restaurant in downtown Atlanta. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the dining room, but the atmosphere at our table was ice cold. Chloe, my brother Jamal's wife, picked up the wine menu with a theatrical sigh. Chloe is a woman who wears her entitlement like a designer accessory, and she never misses an opportunity to remind me of my place. "Are you sure you can afford this place?" "Maya?" Chloe asked, her voice carrying across the quiet dining room. "I mean, an appetizer here costs more than what you probably make in a week at whatever desk job you are working now. It is just irresponsible for someone on a basic salary to suggest a restaurant like this." I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, letting her words hang in the air. I did not correct her. I did not tell her that my so-called desk job was actually managing a private equity firm that handled hundreds of millions of dollars. I did not mention that I developed high-end commercial real estate across the East Coast. I just looked at her and smiled. Jamal chuckled, wrapping an arm around Chloe. "Come on, babe, let her pretend she is a big shot for one night. It is her birthday after all. We can spot her if her card declines." My mother Vivian adjusted her pearls and looked at me with pure disdain. She had always treated Jamal like royalty, despite his string of failed business ventures and mounting debts. Jamal was the golden child. I was the family bank account. "Maya, you really should listen to your sister-in-law," Vivian said, her tone dripping with false concern. "You are 32, single, and still trying to live above your means. It is embarrassing. You should be saving every penny. Especially since family is supposed to help family and your brother is going through a tough transition right now." The tough transition she was referring to was Jamal getting evicted from his luxury townhouse because he spent his rent money on cryptocurrency schemes. But in my mother's eyes, Jamal's failures were just bad luck, and my independence was a personal insult. I set my glass down. "I am doing fine, Mom," I said evenly. "I can handle my own birthday dinner." Chloe scoffed, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Sure you can. Just like you handled your student loans by working 3 jobs, while Jamal got to focus on his entrepreneurial spirit. It is not our fault you chose the hard way, Maya. But honestly, watching you try to keep up appearances is just sad. We all know you are renting that little apartment downtown. You do not own anything." Every word they spoke was designed to make me feel small. They fed off it. They needed me to be the struggling single black woman so they could feel superior. My father Marcus sat there silently slicing his steak, never once defending me. He only existed to nod along with whatever Vivian wanted. He was the one who had co-signed on my first apartment 10 years ago, a fact my mother had held over my head ever since, treating it like a lifelong debt of gratitude I had to repay with my absolute obedience. That is when I saw it. Vivian leaned close to Marcus, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that she thought I could not hear over the restaurant music. "While everyone is here," she muttered, "tell your son to go change the locks at her apartment. Throw her things in the hall if you have to." Marcus blinked, then gave a slow, cowardly nod. He tapped Jamal under the table. Jamal pulled out his phone, pretended to read a text message, and stood up. "Sorry, guys, I have to take this call for a new business pitch," Jamal lied smoothly. "Do not order the main course without me." I watched my brother hurry out the front doors of the restaurant, a smug grin plastered on his face. He was heading straight to my building, fully intending to lock me out of my own home and claim it for himself and Chloe. They really believed they had the power to leave me homeless on my birthday. They really believed I was still the helpless 22-year-old girl who needed their permission to breathe. Chloe took another sip of her wine, looking at me with pure malice. You know, Maya, she said, her voice dripping with venom, you really should learn to share. Jamal deserves a nice place to live. It is a shame you are so selfish with what little you have. I smiled again, picking up my menu. I am not selfish at all, Chloe, I replied softly. In fact, I'm about to give you exactly what you deserve. Chloe's perfectly arched eyebrows pulled together in a deep frown. She set her wine glass down with a sharp clink, clearly confused by my calm demeanor. What exactly is that supposed to mean, Maya? She demanded. Are you threatening me? Before I could answer, my mother slammed her palm flat against the white tablecloth. The silver cutlery rattled. We are not doing this tonight, Vivian snapped, her voice dropping its artificial sweetness entirely. She checked her gold watch, calculating how long Jamal would need to reach my building. Since your brother has stepped away for his very important call, we are going to have a real family discussion right now. I leaned back in my velvet chair and crossed my arms. By all means, Mom, I said. Let us have a real discussion. Vivian squared her shoulders. She looked at me not as a daughter, but as a subordinate who had stepped out of line. You are packing your things tonight, Maya. Chloe and Jamal are moving into your apartment tomorrow morning. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the heavy restaurant air. I did not blink. I did not shout. I just stared at the woman who had birthed me, watching the absolute entitlement radiate from her pores. Did you not hear your mother? Marcus finally spoke up. My father, the man who had never protected me a day in his life, pointed a thick finger in my direction. Your brother lost his townhouse because the market took a bad turn. He needs stability right now. You are single. You only have yourself to worry about. You can easily find a smaller place or rent a room somewhere. Family steps up when things get hard. I let out a short, dry laugh. So let me get this straight. You sent Jamal to physically break into my home to change the locks, and now you are telling me I am being evicted by my own parents. Vivian waved her hand dismissively, totally unbothered that I had caught on to her whispered scheme. It is not an eviction if it is my apartment, Maya. Need I remind you who co-signed that lease 10 years ago when you were just a broke college graduate? My name is on that guarantor paperwork. I have every legal right to transfer the occupancy to my son. You have been living there comfortably for a decade. It is time you paid your dues. Chloe chimed in, inspecting her manicured nails. Honestly, Maya, the place is incredibly cramped and the neighborhood is not exactly what I am used to. But we are willing to make the sacrifice and take it off your hands until Jamal closes his next big deal. You should be thanking us for taking over the lease. They were living in a complete delusion. My mother genuinely believed a 10-year-old co-signer's signature on a basic rental agreement gave her supreme authority over my life. She had no idea that I had bought out the entire building 3 years ago. I did not just own my penthouse. I owned the walls, the lobby, the elevators, and the ground they were standing on. But I was not ready to drop that bomb just yet. I wanted to see exactly how deep their greed went. I see, I said slowly, tracing the rim of my water glass. So Jamal gets my home. What else does he get? Marcus reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper and slid it across the table until it rested right next to my plate. He tapped it twice. We also need you to sign this, he said, his voice lowering to a demanding growl. It is a promissory note. Jamal has incurred some temporary debts with his previous landlords and a few investors. It is nothing he cannot handle eventually, but he needs immediate liquidity to clear his name and start fresh. I glanced down at the paper without touching it. The amount printed at the top in bold black ink was $150,000. You want me to take out a $150,000 loan for Jamal? I asked, keeping my tone deadly quiet. Vivian leaned forward, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. We are not asking, Maya. We are telling you. You have been hoarding your salary for years. You have no husband to support, no children to feed. What exactly are you doing with your money? Buying more cheap pantsuits. It is your duty as a black woman to lift up your brother. He is the man of this family. He carries the legacy. If he falls, we all fall. You are going to go to the bank on Monday, secure this loan, and transfer the funds to his account. The black tax. There it was. The toxic, suffocating expectation that because I was the unmarried daughter, my sole purpose on this earth was to be a beast of burden for the golden child. I was supposed to sacrifice my credit, my home, and my future to fund Jamal's delusions of grandeur. And if I refuse, I challenged meeting my father's gaze. Marcus scoffed, a nasty sound that drew a quick glance from a waiter passing by. If you refuse, we will ruin you. Your mother will contact the property management company and have you legally removed from the premises by tomorrow afternoon. I will personally call every contact I have in this city and make sure you cannot even rent a cardboard box. You will have no home, no family, and no support. You will be nothing, Maya, just like you were before we helped you. Chloe smiled, looking immensely satisfied. Just sign the paper, Maya. Do not make this harder than it has to be. You always have to be so difficult. The sheer level of manipulation was staggering. They had brought me to an expensive dinner under the guise of celebrating my birthday, only to execute a coordinated ambush to strip me of everything I had worked for. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was trapped, intimidated, and terrified of losing their approval. I picked up the promissory note. I looked at the absurd figure, then looked at the 3 people sitting across from me who shared my blood, but possessed none of my loyalty. I felt no sorrow. I felt no heartbreak. I only felt the cold, sharp thrill of absolute power. I folded the paper neatly in half. Then I folded it again. You are absolutely right about one thing, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a blade. Family should step up when things get hard, but you made one massive miscalculation tonight. Vivian frowned, her posture stiffening. What are you talking about? Stop stalling and sign the paper. I dropped the folded piece of paper directly into my half-full glass of water. We all watched the thick ink bleed and blur as the paper sank to the bottom. Chloe gasped. Are you crazy? That was a legal document. No, Chloe, I replied, picking up my napkin and dabbing my lips. That was a piece of trash. And I am done letting this family treat me like a landfill. Vivian slammed her hand on the table again, leaning so far forward I could smell the expensive wine on her breath. You ungrateful little brat. You think you can disrespect us in public. You think you can walk away from your obligations. I will make one phone call right now and have your belongings thrown into the street. Jamal is already there. He has the tools. He is changing those locks as we speak. You have nowhere to go tonight. I did not break eye contact. Call them Mom, I challenged quietly. Call the property manager. Call whoever you think is in charge. Because you are going to be very disappointed when nobody answers. Marcus's face turned a dangerous shade of red. You are making a huge mistake, Maya. You are burning bridges you cannot afford to rebuild. I smiled, the most genuine smile I had worn all evening. I do not need your bridges, Dad. I own the whole river. The silence that followed my statement was absolute. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of genuine confusion cross my father's face. He looked at Vivian, waiting for her to translate my defiance into something they could easily dismiss. My mother, true to form, let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of the restaurant. You own the river, Vivian repeated, her voice dripping with pure condescension. Listen to yourself, Maya. You read a few self-help books and suddenly you think you are a real estate mogul. You are a glorified secretary who got lucky with a decent salary. Do not sit here and speak to us in riddles. Marcus leaned forward, his face flushed with indignation. He pointed a trembling finger at the water glass, where the promissory note was currently dissolving into a cloudy mess of ink and pulp. You think ruining a piece of paper changes anything? I will have my lawyer draft another one tomorrow morning. You will sign it, and you will transfer the $150,000 to Jamal by Friday. You owe this family. You are going to pay your share of the black tax just like everyone else who makes it out. We gave you the foundation to succeed. The sheer delusion in his voice made my blood run ice cold. I placed my hands flat on the table, leaning in so they could hear every single word clearly. You gave me a foundation. I asked, my voice dangerously low. Let us talk about that foundation, Dad. Let us talk about the exact price of this so-called family tax you think I owe. Because from where I am sitting, I paid my debt in full exactly 10 years ago. Vivian shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting away for a split second. She knew exactly what was coming, but I was not going to let her hide from it anymore. I was 22 years old. I continued holding my mother's gaze until she was forced to look back at me. I had just graduated and was trying to rent my very first apartment. Do you remember what happened, Mom? Because I remember sitting in a leasing office, humiliated being told my credit score was completely destroyed. I found out that my own mother had stolen my social security number to open 3 different credit cards in my name. Chloe frowned, looking back and forth between us. Wait, what is she talking about? I am talking about the $40,000 of debt Vivian racked up on luxury vacations and seed money for Jamal's first failed business venture. I said, never taking my eyes off my mother. She maxed out cards in my name and left me to deal with the fallout. I had to work 3 different jobs. I worked nights, weekends, and holidays, sleeping 4 hours a night just to pay off debt that was not mine. I did it because I was foolish enough to want to protect you. I did it so my own mother would not go to federal prison for identity theft. That was my black tax. I paid it in blood and sweat when I was 22. I am not giving this family another dime. Marcus slammed his fist against the table, rattling the silverware. How dare you bring up ancient history? Your mother made a mistake during a difficult financial period. We moved past that. Jamal needs you now. He does not need me, I corrected sharply. He needs a reality check. He is a 34-year-old man who cannot even keep a roof over his own head without mommy and daddy extorting his younger sister. That was when Chloe decided to jump into the ring. She crossed her arms, her face twisting into a sneer of pure disdain. She had married into this family 5 years ago, and she had absorbed their entitlement perfectly. This right here is exactly why you are 32 and completely alone. Maya, Chloe said, her voice loud enough to turn heads at the neighboring tables. You are so defensive and calculating. You are the textbook definition of the bitter, hyper-independent black woman who thinks she does not need anybody. No man is ever going to want to deal with a woman who is this rigid and unforgiving. Jamal is a family man. He is building a legacy with me. We are trying to establish a future, and you cannot even find the basic generosity to help your own blood when we need it most. You are just a lonely woman hoarding a paycheck out of spite. I looked at my white sister-in-law, watching her weaponize racial stereotypes against me with absolute ease. She felt so safe, so protected by my parents' constant validation of Jamal, that she thought she could sit across from me and tear down my identity without any consequences. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the angry reaction they were so desperately trying to provoke. You talk about legacy, Chloe, I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. But you do not even know what the word means. You see Jamal as some great patriarch. I see a man who just sent a text message pretending he had a business call, all so he could sneak over to my building with a crowbar to steal an apartment he cannot afford. You two are not building a legacy. You are building a house of cards, and it is currently collapsing on top of you. You are a disrespectful, selfish girl, Vivian hissed, grabbing her expensive purse from the empty chair beside her. I should have let you drown in your own arrogance years ago. We are done asking nicely. You are going to sign a new loan agreement tomorrow, or I am calling the property manager first thing in the morning to have your belongings thrown into the street. We will see how strong and independent you feel when you are sitting on the curb with your suitcases. I smiled, reaching slowly into my designer handbag. It is fascinating how much faith you have in a 10-year-old co-signer agreement, Mom. But since you are so eager to talk about property management and who holds the power, I think it is time we settle the bill for this lovely birthday dinner. Right on cue, the waiter arrived at our table carrying a sleek black leather folder. He placed it carefully in the center of the white linen cloth. The total damage for the evening was $4,800. For a family that claimed to be struggling, a family that was currently begging me to take out a massive loan to save their golden child, they had certainly not held back. They had ordered vintage champagne, the most expensive cuts of Wagyu steak, imported truffles, and multiple appetizers. Marcus immediately patted his suit jacket pockets, performing a terrible and thoroughly practiced piece of acting. "Oh, I must have left my wallet in my other coat," he muttered, looking anywhere but at the leather folder. Chloe suddenly found the restaurant ceiling architecture incredibly fascinating, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Vivian, without missing a single beat, slid the heavy folder across the table until it touched the edge of my plate. "Consider it your contribution to the family," Vivian said smoothly, completely unfazed by the staggering amount. "Since you are so determined to be ungrateful and difficult about the loan, the least you can do is pay for your own birthday celebration. Besides, Jamal is not here to split it. He is busy doing the heavy lifting for his future. Just put the bill on whatever credit card you have left, and let us be done with this." I did not argue. I did not complain or shed a single tear like I would have a decade ago. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a solid titanium American Express Centurion card, the black card. I placed it gently on top of the receipt. The heavy metal made a sharp, distinct thud against the silver tray. Chloe's eyes snapped downward at the sound. Her jaw actually dropped. As someone obsessed with wealth status and climbing the social ladder, my white sister-in-law knew exactly what that piece of metal meant. You cannot get a black card by simply filling out an application. You have to be invited, and you only get that invitation if you are moving hundreds of thousands of dollars on a regular basis. Vivian stared at the black metal, her brain clearly struggling to process the visual information in front of her. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice entirely losing its commanding edge. "Did you steal it from your boss? Are you committing fraud again, Maya? I swear to you I will not cover for your mistakes this time." I signaled the waiter, who promptly stepped forward to process the payment. "I am not committing fraud, Mom," I said, keeping my posture perfectly relaxed. "And for the record, you never covered for me. I earned this card." I sat back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap as I watched the panic slowly begin to replace the arrogance on their faces. You see, I am not a glorified secretary. I am not a basic corporate employee trying to scrape together rent money at the end of every month. For the last 5 years, I have been the managing partner and chairwoman of a private equity firm specializing in high-end commercial real estate development. I do not just earn a basic salary, Chloe. I manage capital flows and investment portfolios that would absolutely make your head spin. Chloe looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Her face turned a blotchy shade of red. "But you live in that rental building downtown," she stammered, her voice pitching higher in disbelief. "Jamal said it was just a basic tenant lease. He said you were barely getting by." I smiled warmly at my mother, soaking in the absolute terror dawning in her eyes. "That brings me back to your threat, Mom. You said you were going to call the property management company tomorrow morning to have me evicted because you co-signed my lease 10 years ago. It is a brilliant, vicious plan, really. Except for one minor detail. That guarantor lease was terminated 8 years ago when I bought my first investment property. And the high-rise building I live in now, the one you think you can kick me out of, I do not rent there. My firm bought the entire tower 3 years ago. I am the property manager. I am the owner." Marcus gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Vivian's face drained of all color, leaving her looking suddenly very old and very fragile. "You are lying," Vivian whispered, though the raw fear in her eyes told me she already knew I was telling the absolute truth. "You are just trying to scare us. You are bluffing to get out of helping your brother." "I am not trying to scare you," I said calmly, leaning forward so they could not escape my gaze. "I am trying to warn you. You sent Jamal to my building tonight. You sent your precious, untouchable golden child to break into my penthouse thinking it was just a cheap rental unit you had legal rights to. You told him to bring tools, change the locks, and throw my belongings into the hallway." The waiter returned, handing me the receipt to sign. I tipped him generously, pocketed my card, and turned my attention back to the 3 people who were currently experiencing their worst nightmare. "Do you know what kind of security a luxury residential tower like that employs, Dad?" I asked softly. "Do you know who rents the other penthouses on my specific floor? I will give you a hint. They do not take kindly to desperate broke men with crowbars trying to pry open their neighbors' doors in the middle of the night." Chloe grabbed her phone, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it onto her lap. She scrambled to pick it up, frantically dialing Jamal's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Where is my husband? Chloe demanded, her voice cracking with panic. What did you do to him? I did nothing to him, I replied, picking up my glass of sparkling water. I have been sitting right here having dinner with my loving family. Jamal chose to play burglar. Jamal chose to follow Mommy's terrible advice. Whatever happens to him tonight is the direct result of his own greed and your collective stupidity. Vivian clutched her chest, breathing heavily, as if the air in the restaurant had suddenly grown thin. You need to call your security desk right now, she commanded, though it sounded more like a desperate plea. You need to tell them he is your brother. You need to call them off before he gets hurt. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my water. Why would I do that, Mom? You told me family steps up when things get hard. Well, things are about to get incredibly hard for Jamal, and I think it is time he learned how to step up and face the consequences. Chloe's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The panic over her husband's impending arrest quickly morphed into a vicious, desperate need to tear me down. She slammed her hands onto the table, leaning across the white linen, her voice pitching into a shrill, hysterical frequency that caused diners 2 tables over to stop eating and turn their heads. You are a monster! Chloe hissed, her eyes wide and wild. You are sitting there acting like some untouchable queen, but you are just a miserable, empty shell. Do you hear me? This right here, this exact attitude is why you are 32 years old and completely alone. That is why you do not have a husband. That is why you do not have a family of your own. I did not flinch. I took a slow breath and let her completely unravel. You think you are so special because you have some money? Chloe continued, her voice growing louder, weaponizing every stereotype she had quietly harbored for the last 5 years. But you are a walking cliché, Maya. No man is ever going to want you. No man can stand a strong black woman who is so rigid, so deeply masculine, and so petty that she calculates every single penny with her own flesh and blood. You are suffocating. You are toxic. You expect everyone to bow down to your independence, but you are just pushing everyone away because you are entirely incapable of love. My mother sat frozen, watching her white daughter-in-law hurl racialized, gendered insults at me. Vivian did not say a single word to defend me. Marcus simply stared at his empty plate. Their silence was deafening, but it was exactly what I expected. They were perfectly willing to let Chloe use my race and my womanhood as a weapon, as long as it served their ultimate goal of breaking my spirit and bringing me back under their control. I picked up my napkin, slowly wiping a non-existent spot from the corner of my mouth. I placed the cloth back on the table, folding my hands together with deliberate precision. Are you quite finished, Chloe? I asked, my voice carrying a terrifying calm that made her briefly snap her mouth shut. You feel very bold right now, I said, leaning in just an inch. You sit there wrapped in a designer dress paid for by my mother's credit card, and you think you have the right to dissect my identity. You married the golden child because you thought you were marrying into generational wealth. You saw a charismatic black man whose parents flaunted a certain lifestyle and you thought you had hit the jackpot. You wanted the aesthetic of black excellence without doing a single day of the actual work. Chloe's face flushed a deep mottled crimson. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off instantly, leaving her no room to breathe. Do not interrupt me, I commanded, projecting the exact authority I used in boardrooms full of aggressive executives. You want to talk about the strong black woman trope. Let us talk about it. This family expected me to be the mule. They expected me to carry the weight of Jamal's continuous failures on my back, to endure financial abuse, to swallow my pride, and to smile while they handed my hard-earned resources over to you. Because that is what the strong black woman is supposed to do, right? She is supposed to suffer in silence. She is supposed to be the bedrock that everyone else stands on, even as she is slowly crushed to death by their endless demands. I looked directly at my mother, who immediately averted her eyes, unable to hold my gaze. Well, I reject the position, I declared, my voice echoing with absolute finality. I am not your foundation. I am not your safety net. And I am certainly not the emotional punching bag for a woman who cannot even afford the rent on the apartment she is currently packing her bags to leave. I turned my attention back to Chloe, watching the tears of pure frustration well up in her eyes. Her entire reality was fracturing, and she had no defense mechanism left other than cruelty. You say no man can stand me because I calculate every penny, I said, smoothly leaning back in my chair. But my ability to calculate is exactly why I am sitting here with absolute freedom while your husband is currently experiencing the harsh reality of the criminal justice system. You thought you could mock my independence. You thought my lack of a wedding ring was a weakness you could exploit. But my independence means no one can legally bind me to your catastrophic debt. My independence means I hold the deed to the very property you tried to steal. You rely on Jamal for survival, and Jamal relies on my parents, and my parents were banking on me. I am the top of the food chain in this family, Chloe. You are just fighting for scraps. Marcus finally found his voice, though it lacked any real conviction. It sounded weak, the voice of a man who realized he had backed the wrong horse for over 3 decades. Maya, that is enough. You are speaking to your sister-in-law. You need to show some respect. Respect is earned, Dad, I replied sharply, shutting him down. She just spent the last 2 minutes calling me an unlovable masculine stereotype, and you sat there in complete silence. You do not get to demand respect when you refuse to protect your own daughter. But that is the story of my entire life, is it not? You and Mom will protect anyone who serves your false narrative of perfection, and you will sacrifice me without a single second thought. Chloe was trembling now. Her hands clutched together so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked at Vivian, pleading silently for backup, begging the matriarch to put me back in my place. But my mother was entirely focused on her own impending disaster. The reality of my words had finally penetrated Vivian's thick layer of denial. Vivian's phone, which had been sitting face down on the table next to her untouched wine glass, suddenly vibrated. The screen lit up with a rapid succession of notifications. It vibrated again, a harsh buzzing sound that felt like a ticking time bomb in the middle of our tense silence. I did not need to see the screen to know what was happening. I had orchestrated this entire evening down to the minute. I had anticipated their greed, their timing, and their exact sequence of betrayal. Go ahead, Mom, I said, gesturing casually toward her glowing phone. Answer it. I am sure it is incredibly important. Vivian glanced down at the glowing screen of her phone, her eyes narrowing as the device vibrated angrily against the wood of the table. For a second, I saw a flash of hesitation cross her perfectly powdered face. But her pride was a sickness, a disease that blinded her to anything that did not serve her immediate ego. Instead of answering the call that I knew would change her entire world, she reached out and pressed the side button, sending the call directly to voicemail. She silenced the device and flipped it face down completely, ignoring the lifeline that could have saved her from the incoming disaster. She did not want a distraction. She wanted an execution. She wanted to look me in the eyes and watch my spirit break in real time. Before Vivian could open her mouth to deliver what she thought would be her killing blow, Marcus finally exploded. My father, a man who had spent his entire life shrinking in the shadow of my mother's demands, decided this was the moment to perform his twisted version of patriarchy. He brought his large hand down hard against the table. The sudden violent impact sent a shockwave through the wood, rattling the crystal wine glasses, and causing a few drops of expensive red wine to spill onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sharp sound cracked like a whip in the quiet restaurant, drawing horrified stares from the affluent diners around us. I did not flinch. I just stared at the red stains spreading across the linen, a perfect physical manifestation of the mess they were making of their own lives. You are an absolute disgrace. Marcus growled, his voice a low, trembling rumble of fury. He leaned across the table, his face twisted into a mask of pure contempt. You sit there with your expensive clothes and your arrogant attitude talking down to the people who gave you life. You are a profound disappointment, Maya. We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head. We clothed you. We made sure you had the tools to survive in a world that does not care about black women. And this is how you repay us. You spit in our faces. You disrespect your brother. You embarrass us in front of your sister-in-law. You are nothing but a selfish, cold-hearted disgrace to the family name. His words were heavy, dripping with decades of conditioned toxicity. This was the ultimate weapon of the black tax, the heavy guilt trip designed to make me feel as though my very existence was a debt I could never fully repay. In his mind, my financial independence was not an achievement to be celebrated, it was an act of profound betrayal. I was a runaway asset, a resource that had dared to build boundaries instead of writing blank checks. I looked at the man who was supposed to be my protector. "You did not give me the tools to survive, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm against his raging anger. "You gave me the tools to survive you. There is a massive difference." Vivian let out a sharp, breathless laugh. It was a cold, cruel sound that held absolutely no warmth. She sat back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest, looking at me with the triumphant, satisfied expression of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. "You can try to sound as smart and as philosophical as you want," Maya Vivian said, a wicked, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "But your little speeches do not change reality. You think you are sitting here holding all the cards because you ruined a piece of paper. You think refusing to sign that loan gives you some kind of power over us tonight. But you are completely delusional." She leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine, fully intending to destroy my world. "It does not even matter if you sign that promissory note," Vivian stated, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "We do not need your signature because we already took what we needed. While you have been sitting here arguing with us, playing the tough, independent career woman, Jamal has been working. He texted me 10 minutes ago, right before Chloe started speaking. He is already inside the building. He is already inside the apartment." Chloe's posture immediately relaxed. The panic that had gripped her just moments ago completely vanished, replaced by a nasty, superior smirk. She reached over and intertwined her fingers with Marcus's hand, a united front of pure malice. "He has the tools," Vivian continued, her voice rising with arrogant glee. "He has the new locks. He is taking your designer clothes, your expensive shoes, and all your little self-help books, and he is tossing them right into the hallway corridor. You refused to help your brother willingly, so we made the decision for you. Jamal and Chloe are moving in tonight, and you, Maya, you are going to walk out of this restaurant with nothing but the purse on your lap." The absolute cruelty of her declaration hung in the air. They had coordinated a dinner on my 32nd birthday specifically to keep me distracted while my brother broke into what they believed was my rental unit. They were gleefully picturing me returning to an apartment building late at night, only to find my keys useless and my personal belongings treated like garbage. "You have no home to go back to," Vivian declared, delivering the final crushing blow. "You are going to have to find a hotel room tonight, assuming your credit cards are not maxed out. You are out on the street. That is what happens when you turn your back on your blood. You end up entirely alone." They looked at me, all three of them, waiting for the tears. They were hungry for the breakdown. They wanted me to drop my calm facade, to panic, to beg my father to intervene, to apologize to my mother, and promise to write the check if she would just call Jamal and tell him to stop. They wanted the strong, unbothered woman to shatter into a million desperate pieces right there in the middle of the restaurant. They had engineered the perfect scenario of complete emotional and physical isolation. My mother, my father, and my sister-in-law had formed an impenetrable wall of hostility, effectively throwing me to the wolves with absolute joy. I looked at my father, who was nodding in agreement with Vivian's cruel declaration. I looked at Chloe, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the thought of stealing my home. And finally, I looked at my mother, who wore the proud expression of a general who had just won a brutal war. It was the most liberating moment of my entire life. Any lingering shred of guilt, any tiny microscopic fragment of daughterly obligation I might have still harbored deep in my chest, evaporated into nothingness. They had just given me the greatest birthday gift I could have ever asked for. They had given me absolute, undeniable proof that I owed them absolutely nothing. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or beg for mercy. I reached out and gently moved the spilled red wine away from my side of the table. "You really thought of everything, Mom," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, soft, and entirely devoid of panic. "You planned a birthday dinner to trap me here. You sent your golden boy to do the dirty work. You even brought an audience to watch me fail. It is a brilliant strategy. It truly is." Vivian's smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. My lack of hysteria was throwing her off script. "Do not try to act tough, Maya." She snapped, her tone defensive. "You have nowhere to go. You are homeless." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that made Marcus shift uncomfortably in his chair. "I am not acting, Mom," I replied, my eyes burning into hers. "I am just sitting here marveling at the fact that you are so blinded by your own greed, you have completely failed to realize who you are actually dealing with. You think Jamal is clearing out my apartment right now. You think he is taking out the trash. But the only thing Jamal is doing right now is begging for his freedom." Before Vivian could process the weight of my words, before she could even open her mouth to scream or demand an explanation about Jamal, the heavy, polished atmosphere of the restaurant intervened. A waiter in a crisp white jacket stepped up to our table, moving with the silent, practiced grace of high-end hospitality. He was completely oblivious to the radioactive tension radiating from our seats. With a polite, professional nod, he placed a sleek, black leather folio directly in the center of the white tablecloth. "I hope the birthday celebration was to your absolute liking this evening," he said smoothly, bowing his head just an inch before stepping back and disappearing into the crowd of affluent diners. The arrival of the bill acted like a sudden reset button for my family. The immediate physical threat of financial responsibility temporarily overrode Vivian's confusion about my warning regarding Jamal. They had spent the entire evening gorging themselves on the finest items the menu had to offer, and now it was time for their favorite part of the night. It was time for the choreographed performance they had perfected over decades. I watched the theater unfold with a sense of clinical fascination. It was like observing a pack of scavengers responding to a conditioned signal. Marcus was the first to act. My father, who had just spent the last 20 minutes aggressively demanding I take out a massive loan to save his golden child, suddenly seemed to shrink. He patted the breast pockets of his custom-tailored suit, his face contorting into an expression of exaggerated, utterly unconvincing surprise. "Well, would you look at that?" he muttered, not making eye contact with anyone at the table. "I must have left my primary card in the glove compartment of the car. I only have a few dollars in cash on me." It was a pathetic Oscar-losing performance. A man who claimed to be the patriarch, the head of the family legacy, suddenly incapacitated by a leather folder. Chloe did not even bother to offer an excuse. The moment the folio hit the table, she snatched her phone from her lap and pressed it against her ear. She turned her entire body away from the table, staring intensely at a blank wall while having a completely fabricated, urgent conversation with a non-existent person. "Oh my goodness, really?" she whispered loudly into the dead receiver. "No, tell the babysitter I will be right there. Just hold on." She was a master at avoiding accountability, perfectly happy to insult my race and my womanhood, but entirely unwilling to chip in for the vintage champagne she had been guzzling all night. That left Vivian. My mother did not shrink, and she did not pretend to look away. She thrived in these moments. She believed that forcing me to pay was the ultimate assertion of her dominance. It was her way of putting the unruly, independent daughter back in her rightful place. Vivian reached out with her manicured hand. She did not even open the leather folder to check the total. She simply pressed her fingertips against the smooth black surface and slid it across the linen tablecloth. The heavy folder came to a stop right against the base of my water glass. I looked down at it, then back up at her. Vivian's lips curled into a cold, arrogant smirk. She had quickly convinced herself that my previous statement about Jamal begging for his freedom was nothing more than a desperate, pathetic bluff. In her mind, I was just trying to distract them from the reality of my impending eviction. "You can drop the dramatic fairy tales about your brother Maya," Vivian said, her voice dripping with venomous authority. "You think you can scare us with these ridiculous lies about police and armed guards. Jamal is fine. He is securing his future, which is exactly what you are going to do right now by paying this bill." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms like a queen demanding tribute from a peasant. "Consider it a display of basic respect," she commanded. "You want to sit here and talk a big game about how independent you are. You want to act like you do not need this family. Then prove you are so successful. Pay for the dinner. Pay for the people who gave you life and put up with your endless, exhausting attitude. It is the absolute bare minimum of filial piety you owe us." The sheer audacity of her entitlement was breathtaking. I reached out and slowly opened the leather cover. The printed receipt stared back at me. The total at the bottom was $4,800. I scanned the itemized list, taking in the sheer gluttony of their betrayal. They had ordered 3 bottles of Dom Perignon, knowing full well I preferred sparkling water. There were charges for imported truffles, Osetra Wagyu steaks, and towers of fresh seafood. They had treated this restaurant like an all-inclusive resort, racking up a bill that was more than most people made in a month, all while actively plotting to leave me homeless on the street. This was the essence of the black tax they expected me to pay. It was not just about helping family in times of need. It was about financing their delusions of grandeur. It was about allowing them to live a luxury lifestyle on my dime, while they simultaneously degraded my existence and plotted my financial ruin. They wanted me to fund the very same hands that were currently trying to strangle my future. "You are hesitating, Maya," Vivian taunted, mistaking my quiet observation for panic. "What is the matter? Did you realize your little checking account cannot cover a real dinner? Is that why you were making up those insane lies about Jamal being arrested? To distract us from the fact that you are completely broke." Marcus cleared his throat, leaning back into the conversation now that Vivian had firmly established the power dynamic. "Just put it on whatever credit cards you have left, Maya," he ordered gruffly. "And then on Monday, you are going to march into the bank and sign that promissory note for your brother. You are going to stop this rebellious nonsense and remember your place in this family hierarchy. We are done playing games with you." Chloe, still holding the phone to her ear, shot a smug sideways glance in my direction. She was waiting for the inevitable moment when my card would decline. She was practically vibrating with the anticipation of watching the waiter return to tell me I had insufficient funds ready to use my humiliation as the ultimate proof that I was exactly the failure they desperately needed me to be. They thought the $4,800 bill was a punishment. They thought sliding that leather folder across the table was the final nail in the coffin of my independence. They truly believed they had trapped me in a corner, forcing me to either admit I was broke or bankrupt myself just to maintain my pride. I closed the leather folder. I looked at the 3 of them, perfectly aligned in their toxic parasitic synergy. They were so confident in their victory. They were so utterly convinced that they were the predators and I was the prey. I did not feel angry. I did not feel the crushing, suffocating anxiety that used to paralyze me when I was in my 20s. I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The kind of calm that only comes when you are holding a royal flush and your opponents have just gone all in with absolutely nothing. "Filial piety," I repeated softly, letting the words roll off my tongue. "You want me to prove my success, Mom? You want me to pay for the privilege of your company?" Vivian raised her chin, her eyes flashing with triumphant malice. "It is your duty," she stated firmly. "Pay the bill, Maya." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes locked onto hers as I reached into my designer handbag. My fingers slipped past the smooth leather compartments of my bag, ignoring the standard debit and credit cards I used for everyday coffee runs. I bypassed the cash. I bypassed the keys. I went straight for the hidden zippered pocket. I pinched the cool matte edge of the heavy titanium. I pulled it out slowly, letting the warm ambient light of the restaurant catch the distinct dark surface of the American Express Centurion card. The black card. I did not slide it across the table. I dropped it. The solid metal hit the leather folio with a heavy, unmistakable thud that resonated across the crystal glasses and porcelain plates on the table. The sound was completely different from the flimsy, hollow clatter of a standard plastic bank card. It carried literal and figurative weight. It carried absolute power. Silence slammed down on our table like a physical force. Chloe froze instantly. The smartphone she had been holding to her ear slowly descended to her lap. The fake animated conversation she had been having with her imaginary babysitter died completely in her throat. As a woman who had spent her entire adult life studying the markers of extreme wealth, who scrutinized designer labels, luxury cars, and exclusive memberships like a religion, she knew exactly what she was looking at. Her eyes widened to the point of straining, locked onto the small piece of black titanium resting on the receipt. All the color drained from her face, leaving her spray tan looking completely artificial against her sudden, sickly pallor. Vivian stared at the card. She did not immediately grasp the specific financial weight it carried, but she recognized the violent shift in the atmosphere. She saw the heavy metallic sheen that absolutely did not belong to a struggling young woman facing imminent eviction. More importantly, she saw Chloe's visceral, terrified reaction. "What is that?" Vivian demanded. Her voice had completely lost its commanding matriarchal boom. It came out thin, laced with a sudden creeping uncertainty. "Is that a prepaid card, Maya? Because they do not split bills here. You need to pay the full amount." I did not say a single word. I simply looked at Chloe, watching the gears grinding in her head as her entire understanding of the family hierarchy shattered into pieces. Chloe swallowed hard. Her throat clicked audibly in the quiet space. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "Vivian, that is not a prepaid card. That is a centurion." Marcus frowned, leaning closer to inspect the metal edge. "A what?" "An invitation-only black card," Chloe whispered. Her eyes darted from the table to my face, as if she were seeing a ghost or a predator she had foolishly mistaken for prey. "You cannot just apply for it. You have to be invited by American Express. You have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to be considered. The initiation fee alone is $10,000. The numbers hung in the air like a guillotine. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Vivian blinked rapidly, her brain desperately trying to process the mathematics. Her mind heavily hardwired to view me as a financial burden, and a perpetual disappointment violently rejected the information. "No," she snapped, shaking her head aggressively. "No, that is impossible. She works at a desk. She is renting a cheap apartment. That must be a fake. People buy dummy cards online to look rich. That is what she did. She bought a fake card to try and embarrass us." Right on cue, our waiter reappeared. He approached the table with his standard professional smile, reaching out to collect the leather folio. His eyes landed on the black titanium card. The polite, automated smile instantly transformed into a look of deep, profound deference. "An excellent choice, madam," the waiter said, bowing his head slightly lower than he had all evening. "I will process this immediately." He picked up the folio, handling the heavy metal card with the utmost care, and turned away. He did not question it. He did not ask for a secondary form of identification or a backup payment method. He took the card and walked toward the primary terminal, treating me not like a troublesome, complaining diner, but like absolute royalty. Vivian watched him walk away, her mouth slightly open. The arrogant smugness that had defined her features for the last hour was completely eradicated. In its place was a frantic, desperate confusion. She looked at Marcus, seeking validation, seeking someone to tell her this was a prank. But my father was staring at the empty space where the card had been. He looked as if he had just witnessed a magic trick he could not explain. How Vivian breathed out, whipping her head back to face me. "How do you have that card? Whose name is on it? Are you committing fraud, Maya? Are you stealing from your company? Because I swear to God, I will not bail you out when the federal agents come knocking on your door." I leaned back in my velvet chair, supremely comfortable. The sheer panic in her voice was absolute music to my ears. "It has my name on it, Mom," I said smoothly. "Maya Elise. No fraud, no stolen funds, just my own hard-earned capital." Chloe gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You told us you were just a mid-level manager," she accused. Her voice was trembling with a mixture of betrayal and intense, burning jealousy. "You said you worked for a private equity firm. You never said you owned anything." "I never said I was a mid-level manager," I corrected her gently, offering a cold smile. "I said I worked in private equity. You and Jamal made the assumption that I was at the bottom of the ladder because that is the only place you could ever imagine me. You needed me to be struggling so you could feel successful. You needed me to be poor so Jamal could look rich. You projected your own insecurities onto me, and I simply allowed you to believe your own delusions." Marcus finally found his voice. He pointed a shaky, accusatory finger at me. "If you have that kind of money, Why have you been letting your brother drown? Why did you not pay off his debts when he asked? Why did you make us sit here and beg? Because his debts are his own consequence, Dad, I replied, my tone turning razor sharp. And because I do not negotiate with extortionists. You invited me here to trap me. You planned to kick me out of my home and force me into a $150,000 loan under the direct threat of homelessness. You treated me like a disposable asset. Why on earth would I hand my wealth over to people who actively despise me? Vivian shook her head, still trapped in the deepest trench of denial. I do not believe it. I do not believe you have that kind of money. You are playing a sick game. You maxed out a credit line to get that card just to show off tonight. You are drowning in debt just like Jamal. You do not get a Centurion card with debt, Mom, I said, leaning forward to deliver the reality check she was fighting so hard to avoid. You get it with massive liquid wealth. You get it by managing capital flows that you cannot even fathom. The waiter returned, breaking the intense, suffocating standoff. He placed the leather folio back on the table, setting a silver pen next to the printed receipt. The payment went through flawlessly, madame, he said respectfully. Thank you so much. I picked up the pen and signed my name with a smooth, sweeping motion. I added a highly generous tip, recognizing that the waiter had provided excellent service despite my family's atrocious behavior. I slipped the heavy black card back into my handbag and closed the clasp with a decisive, echoing snap. I looked at the three of them. They were completely paralyzed. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had entirely inverted. They had walked into this restaurant believing they held my life and my future in their hands. They had spent the evening mocking my independence, insulting my race, and threatening my safety. And with a single piece of metal, I had effortlessly crushed their entire reality. So I said, breaking the silence, "The bill is paid. My contribution to the family is officially settled. Now, as I was saying before we were interrupted by the check, let us talk about Jamal." Vivian jumped slightly at the mention of his name. The distraction of the bill had briefly pulled her away from my previous warning, but now the terror came rushing back with double the force. "What about Jamal?" Vivian demanded, her voice barely a whisper. "What did you mean when you said he was begging for his freedom?" Chloe leaned forward, her eyes wide, the reality of my wealth making her suddenly terrified of what I was actually capable of doing. "Tell me where my husband is," she pleaded. I did not answer her immediately. Instead, I reached for my wine glass. I lifted the crystal stem, swirling the deep red liquid for a moment, before taking a slow, deliberate sip. The restaurant around us continued its quiet hum of clinking silverware and polite conversation, completely oblivious to the absolute destruction happening at our table. I set the glass down. I looked at Chloe, watching the desperate entitlement drain from her eyes. "I do not work for a salary." "Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calibrated to shatter whatever remained of her pride. "I do not wait for a direct deposit on the 1st and 15th of the month. I am the chairwoman of a private equity investment fund. I dictate the salaries of men who have been in this industry longer than you have been alive. While you are busy maxing out credit cards to buy designer bags to impress women who do not even like you, I was acquiring commercial real estate portfolios across 3 states. Chloe shrank back into her chair. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The illusion of her superiority was completely dead. I turned my gaze to my mother. Vivian was staring at me with a mixture of horror and furious denial. Her hands were trembling in her lap. "And Mom," I continued, leaning forward just enough to make her flinch. "That lease agreement you think you are holding over my head like a loaded weapon, the one you thought gave you the ultimate authority to leave me homeless on my birthday, it was canceled 8 years ago." Vivian shook her head in rapid, jerky movements. "That is a lie. That is a complete lie. The property management company still sends me the annual guarantor confirmation every January. I have the emails on my phone right now. You cannot cancel a co-signed lease without the guarantor's signature." I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that made Marcus physically recoil. "You are right, Mom. You cannot cancel it without jumping through a massive amount of legal hoops." So I did not jump. I simply bought my way out. 8 years ago, I paid the original building owner a premium in cash to terminate that specific contract. I immediately signed a new private lease under a corporate LLC that I created, an LLC that you knew absolutely nothing about. But the emails, Vivian stammered, her voice cracking. The guarantor notices. I own the property management company, I explained, watching the color completely vanish from her face. When my firm bought the entire residential tower 3 years ago, we absorbed the management entity. I personally instructed the automated system to keep sending you those meaningless guarantor emails every single January. I wanted you to receive them. I wanted you to feel secure in your fake, pathetic authority. I wanted you to firmly believe you still had a chain around my neck. Because as long as you thought you controlled my housing, you never bothered to look closely at what I was actually building right under your nose. Marcus grabbed the edge of the table. He was putting the pieces together, and the reality of Jamal's situation was finally hitting his brain with the force of a freight train. Maya, Marcus, said, his voice dropping into a frantic, breathless panic. What kind of security does your building have? You said Jamal was begging for his freedom. You said he was dealing with armed guards. What did you do? I did nothing, Dad. Jamal did this to himself. I warned you all earlier, but you were too busy insulting me to listen. You sent your golden child to commit a felony. You sent him to break a door down with a crowbar in a building that caters to billionaires, tech founders, and foreign dignitaries. Chloe let out a sharp, breathless sob. She grabbed her phone again, staring at the blank screen as if she could will Jamal to call her back. You have to call the front desk, she begged. All her previous venom completely replaced by pathetic desperation. You own the building. You can just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them he is your brother. They will let him go. Please, Maya. If he gets arrested for breaking and entering, he will violate his probation from that crypto fraud case last year. He will actually go to prison. I tilted my head, studying her terrified face. Why on earth would I do that, Chloe? You just spent 10 minutes telling me that no man would ever want me because I am a rigid, calculating, bitter black woman. You told me my independence was a disease. Well, my independence is the only thing standing between your husband and a federal holding cell. And you are demanding that I use my power to save a man who went to my home with the explicit intention of throwing my belongings into the trash. Vivian reached across the table, her manicured fingers hovering just inches from my arm. She was too scared to actually touch me. Maya, please, she pleaded, her voice shaking violently. He is your brother. He is blood. You cannot let them lock him up. He was just doing what we asked him to do. We were desperate. We were trying to save his family. You were not trying to save his family, Mom, I corrected her, my tone dropping to a deadly whisper. You were trying to sacrifice me to fund his failures. You have spent your entire life shielding Jamal from the consequences of his own incompetence. You stole my identity to pay his debts when I was 22. You demanded I take out a $150,000 loan today. You tried to steal my home tonight. You have always viewed my existence as a resource for him to consume. I picked up my water glass, taking another slow sip while they sweated in sheer terror. Let me explain exactly what Jamal is currently facing, I said, setting the glass down. Because he did not just try to break into a standard luxury apartment. I moved out of that specific penthouse unit 2 weeks ago. I relocated to a larger estate in the suburbs. I kept the penthouse empty for a few days to have it professionally cleaned and staged, because as of this morning, I leased that unit to a very exclusive corporate client. Marcus's jaw tightened. Who, he demanded. Who did you lease it to? I leaned forward, looking my father dead in the eye. I leased it to the French embassy. They are using it as a private residence for a high-ranking diplomatic envoy who arrived in Atlanta yesterday. Chloe let out a piercing, strangled cry, burying her face in her hands. That is right, I continued, my voice perfectly steady. Your precious Jamal did not just try to break into his sister's apartment. He showed up with burglary tools and attempted to force his way into a sovereign diplomatic residence. The armed guards who caught him do not work for my property management company. They work for federal security. Vivian slumped back in her chair. Her chest heaved as she struggled to draw breath. She looked completely broken, entirely defeated by the monster of her own creation. The black tax she had tried to aggressively collect had just bankrupted her entire lineage. She had finally pushed the wrong daughter too far, and she had driven her favorite son straight into a federal trap. "You planned this?" Marcus accused, his voice shaking with a mixture of awe and terror. "You knew he would go there tonight? You set him up." "I did not set him up, Dad," I replied softly. "I simply stopped being his human shield. I stopped absorbing the damage. You handed him a crowbar and gave him the address. I just let him walk through the door you opened." The restaurant around us suddenly felt incredibly small. The ambient noise seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but the ragged, panicked breathing of my family. They were staring at me like I was a stranger, and in many ways, I was. The obedient, terrified, desperate daughter they remembered had died 10 years ago. The woman sitting across from them was forged in the fire of their betrayal, and she was absolutely indestructible. Chloe sobbed loudly, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. "You have to fix this," she wailed, reaching out toward me. "Please, Maya. You have the money. You have the lawyers. You can make this go away. We will do anything. We will leave you alone forever. Just save him." Before I could even formulate a response to her pathetic bargaining, a violent commotion erupted near the front entrance of the restaurant. The heavy oak doors burst open with a loud, aggressive crash, shattering the refined elegance of the dining room. Diners gasped and servers froze in their tracks. I did not need to turn my head to know who had just arrived. The timing was absolutely flawless. Jamal burst through the threshold. The heavy oak doors rebounded against their brass stops with a violently loud crack. The refined, low hum of the upscale dining room vanished in an instant. Violin music from the corner seemed to screech to a halt. Wealthy patrons previously engaged in hushed conversations over caviar and truffles suddenly turned in their velvet chairs, their faces contorted in genuine alarm. Waiters carrying silver trays froze mid-step. And there stood Jamal, the untouchable golden child. The man who had been paraded around my entire life as the pinnacle of black excellence, the supposed heir to a legacy that did not actually exist. I watched him stumble into the soft, warm light of the restaurant lobby, and the sight was absolutely breathtaking in its wretchedness. He was completely unrecognizable. Jamal always prided himself on his aesthetic. He never left the house without a perfectly tailored suit, a fresh haircut, and a smug, superior grin that communicated his absolute belief that the world owed him everything. But the man gasping for air by the hostess stand looked like he had just narrowly escaped a war zone. His expensive designer dress shirt was soaked straight through with dark, heavy sweat clinging to his chest and back. The top 3 buttons had been violently torn off, leaving the collar hanging askew against his neck. One of the sleeves was stained with what looked like grease and dirt. His face, usually so composed and arrogant, was completely drained of blood. He possessed a sickly grayish pallor that made his eyes look wide, wild, and entirely unhinged. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving with deep, ragged gasps that echoed loudly across the silent dining room. "Sir, you cannot barge in here like this." The maitre d' stepped forward, raising his hands in a frantic attempt to maintain the restaurant's prestigious decorum. "Sir, I must ask you to leave the premises immediately, or I will be forced to call security." Jamal did not even register the man's presence. He shoved the maitre d' aside with a reckless, frantic push, his wild eyes scanning the sea of white tablecloths. He was hunting for a lifeline. He was hunting for the one person who had spent 34 years shielding him from the consequences of his own disastrous actions. His bloodshot eyes finally locked onto our table. He let out a sound that was half sob, half choked gasp. He stumbled forward, his polished leather shoes squeaking harshly against the immaculate marble floor. He moved with zero coordination, bumping hard against the back of a stranger's chair, knocking a half-full wineglass onto the carpet. The diner let out a sharp cry of indignation, but Jamal did not stop to apologize. He did not care about the spectacle he was creating. He was operating on pure, primal terror. I remained perfectly still in my seat, sipping my water as I watched the majestic collapse of my parents' greatest investment. Jamal reached our table and practically collapsed. He did not go to his wife. Chloe was sitting right there, her hands outstretched, her face a mask of absolute horror as she took in the ruined state of her husband. She cried out his name, reaching for his arm. But Jamal bypassed the woman he had sworn to build a legacy with. In his moment of ultimate shattering crisis, the 34-year-old man reverted entirely to a terrified child. He dropped heavily onto his knees right beside Vivian's chair. The impact of his knees hitting the floor sent a dull thud through the table legs. He threw his arms forward, grabbing handfuls of my mother's expensive silk dress. He gripped her forearms with a desperate, crushing intensity, his knuckles turning white as he buried his sweating, dirt-streaked face into her lap. "Mom?" He gasped out, his voice cracking and breaking in ways I had never heard before. "Mom, help me. You have to help me." Vivian sat absolutely paralyzed. The matriarch who had spent the entire evening demanding respect, projecting power, and threatening my survival was now completely frozen in sheer, unadulterated mortification. She was highly aware of the dozens of affluent eyes burning into her back. The social humiliation of her golden boy groveling on the floor of a five-star restaurant was destroying her fabricated high society image second by agonizing second. "Jamal, get up!" Vivian hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper. She tried to pry his hands off her dress, looking frantically around the room. "Get up off the floor right now. People are staring at us. What is wrong with you? You are making a scene." But Jamal could not hear her concerns about social etiquette. The terror had entirely short-circuited his brain. He clung to her tighter, his broad shoulders shaking violently as he let out a loud, pathetic whimper. "I went to the building." Jamal stammered, his words tumbling out in a rapid, disjointed panic. "I went to the building just like you told me to, Mom. I had the bag. I had the crowbar. I went up to the penthouse floor. I swear I was just doing what you said. I was going to change the locks. I was going to get the apartment." Marcus finally snapped out of his shock. He stood up halfway, leaning over the table to grab his son's shoulder. "Jamal, keep your voice down," Marcus commanded gruffly, trying to salvage whatever tiny scrap of dignity the family had left. "Pull yourself together, son. You are acting like a lunatic. Tell us what happened at the apartment." Jamal violently flinched away from his father's touch. He looked up at Vivian, his face contorted in absolute agony. Tears were openly streaming down his cheeks, mixing with the sweat and grime on his skin. This was the man they had told me I needed to sacrifice my future for. This was the man who was supposed to carry the family legacy. He was weeping on the floor of a restaurant, begging his mother to fix a mess that could not be fixed. "It was not her stuff," Jamal cried out, his voice carrying clearly to the neighboring tables. The people dining nearby had entirely abandoned their meals, watching the drama unfold, with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. "Mom, you said it was her apartment. You told me it was just a cheap rental. You told me I could just walk in and take it." But it was not her stuff inside. Chloe scrambled out of her chair, dropping to her knees next to Jamal on the dining room floor. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. The designer illusion she had tried so desperately to maintain all night was completely shattered. "Jamal, look at me," Chloe begged, her voice cracking with hysteria. "What are you talking about? Whose stuff was it? What happened to you? Why is your shirt ripped? Where have you been?" Jamal ignored his wife completely. His terrified eyes remained locked onto Vivian, seeking a salvation that my mother was entirely incapable of providing. The realization that I had told the absolute truth was finally sinking its claws deeply into Vivian's mind, and I could see the exact moment her denial shattered. She looked at Jamal, then slowly, fearfully, she lifted her gaze to meet mine across the table. I offered her a very small, very cold smile. I raised my water glass in a silent, mocking toast, acknowledging her profound failure. Jamal continued to babble, his voice growing more frantic and high-pitched. "The police, Mom. There were so many police. They came out of nowhere. They had weapons, real weapons. They threw me against the wall. They put a gun against my head. I thought I was going to die. I swear to God, I thought they were going to shoot me right there in the hallway." Vivian's mouth opened, but her vocal cords failed her. She sat completely motionless, her manicured hands hovering helplessly above Jamal's trembling shoulders. The grand commanding matriarch had been reduced to a silent, terrified spectator in her own orchestrated disaster. The power she thought she wielded over me had been entirely illusionary, and the reality of my strength was currently crushing her golden child into the ground. Marcus reached down and physically grabbed Jamal by the armpits, hauling him up from the restaurant floor. He practically dragged his fully grown son and dropped him heavily into the empty chair next to Chloe. Jamal slumped forward instantly. His broad shoulders caved inward, and his chest heaved as he gasped for air, looking exactly like a man who had just run for his life. He knocked over a water glass in the process, sending a stream of ice water pouring directly onto his lap. But he did not even flinch. His eyes remained fixed on Vivian, filled with a frantic, animalistic terror that stripped away every ounce of his usual arrogance. "Mom, you have to listen to me." Jamal choked out, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "That apartment does not belong to her. There is no lease. There is no landlord." Vivian swallowed hard, her throat clicking audibly in the tense silence. "What are you talking about, Jamal? You just went to the wrong floor. You made a mistake. You panicked." "I did not make a mistake," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking loudly. He gripped the edge of the table, his fingernails digging frantically into the white linen tablecloth. "I went to the exact address. I took the private elevator straight to the penthouse level, just like you told me. But the second the elevator doors opened, I did not even get to step out into the hallway." He paused, taking a ragged, desperate breath. He looked around the table, his eyes wide and haunted. There were guards, he whispered, the memory clearly replaying vividly in his mind. Armed guards in tactical suits. They were not building concierges, Mom. They were not regular security officers. They had earpieces. They had assault rifles strapped to their chests. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. All the color drained from her face as she stared at her husband. "I stepped out of the elevator, and before I could even raise the crowbar, they were on me." Jamal continued, his voice dropping into a rapid, frantic rhythm. "They slammed me face first into the marble wall. They knocked the wind completely out of me. I felt the cold metal of a gun barrel pressed directly against the back of my head. I thought I was dead. I thought my life was over right there in the hallway. They were yelling at me in French and English, demanding to know who sent me, asking if I was an assassin." "An assassin, Mom? Do you understand what kind of danger you sent me into?" Marcus turned completely pale, his hands shaking where they rested on the table. "French? Why were they speaking French?" "I told you," I interjected quietly, keeping my voice perfectly calm and conversational while the rest of my family hyperventilated. "I leased the penthouse to the French embassy this morning. You sent your son to break into a heavily fortified diplomatic residence." Jamal pointed a trembling finger at me, but he did not have the courage to actually look me in the eye. "She is telling the truth," he cried out, turning his desperate gaze back to Vivian. "They dragged me down to an underground security bunker. They ran my name through a federal database. They saw my prior convictions, Mom. They saw my active probation status for the crypto fraud. The head of security looked me dead in the face and told me I was looking at 10 to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for attempting to breach a diplomatic safe house with burglary tools." Vivian gripped her pearl necklace, her knuckles turning bone white as she twisted the expensive jewelry. "But you are here," she stammered, blind desperation bleeding heavily into her tone. "You are here so they let you go. You just explained it was a misunderstanding, right? You told them it was a simple family dispute over a rental unit." Jamal let out a bitter, broken laugh that morphed instantly into a pathetic sob. "A family dispute? Mom, they do not care about our family. They do not care about your guarantees or your useless co-signed leases. They laughed in my face when I told them I was there to claim my sister's apartment. They told me the owner of the building, a massive private equity firm, had personally authorized the highest-level security protocols for that specific floor." He leaned across the table, his sweating face inches from Vivian's terrified expression. I had to beg, he confessed, the absolute last shred of his golden child ego disintegrating before our eyes. I dropped to my knees in that concrete security bunker. I begged them not to call my probation officer. I cried like a child. I told them I was broke, that I was desperate, that my mother had given me bad information. I threw away every single ounce of pride I had just to keep them from putting me in handcuffs and dragging me away. Chloe was shaking her head repeatedly, her carefully maintained socialite persona entirely gone. What did it cost? She demanded, her voice shrill and tight with rising panic. Jamal, what did you do? How did you get out? Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, heavy tears leaking from the corners and cutting tracks through the grime on his face. They were going to process me for felony breaking and entering. The only way they agreed to release me without pressing formal federal charges was if I paid an immediate exorbitant security breach fine. It is a civil penalty clause they use for high-profile properties to avoid media scandals and protracted legal battles. How much? Marcus demanded, his voice thick with dread. $25,000, Jamal whispered, opening his eyes to look directly at his wife. Chloe stopped breathing. The silence at the table was so absolute, you could hear the faint hum of the restaurant air conditioning above us. $25,000. Chloe repeated the words, sounding hollow and impossibly distant. Jamal, we do not have $25,000. We just got evicted today. We have exactly $400 in our primary checking account. I know, Jamal sobbed, burying his face in his trembling hands. I know we do not have it. But I had no choice. They were putting the steel handcuffs on my wrists. They were dialing the police chief. So I used the emergency business line of credit. I used the absolute last credit card we have to our names, the one we were supposed to use to book our hotel room tonight. I maxed it out entirely just to pay the breach fine so they would let me walk out the service entrance. Chloe let out a sound like a wounded animal. She grabbed Jamal's shoulders and began shaking him violently, uncaring of the audience watching them. You maxed out the emergency card. Are you completely out of your mind? How are we supposed to pay for a hotel? How are we supposed to eat tomorrow? We are bankrupt, Jamal. You just bankrupted us for nothing. Jamal did not fight back. He just sat there and let his wife shake him, looking completely and utterly defeated. We are not just bankrupt, Chloe. We are blacklisted. The security chief took my photograph, my fingerprints, and a copy of my license plate. He told me if I ever step foot within a 5-mile radius of that building, or if I ever approach any property owned by that firm, they will bypass the local police and hand my file directly over to the FBI. He looked at Vivian, his bloodshot eyes filled with a dark, resentful accusation. You told me it would be easy. You said she was just a weak, struggling girl living in a cramped rental. You told me I was taking what rightfully belonged to this family. You sent me into a trap, Mom. You sent me into a meat grinder, and now I have absolutely nothing left. I watched the scene unfold with pristine, crystal-clear satisfaction. The beloved golden child was finally holding the toxic matriarch accountable. The grand illusion Vivian had spent decades carefully cultivating had been incinerated in less than an hour. She had tried to sacrifice me on the altar of Jamal's success, expecting me to quietly accept my role as the family mule. But instead, she had marched her favorite son directly into a financial and legal slaughterhouse. I picked up my fork, adjusting it slightly so it lay perfectly parallel to my knife. The gentle clink of the silver seemed deafening in the tense, ruined space of our dining table. It is truly remarkable, I observed, keeping my tone light and deeply conversational. You all sat here 20 minutes ago calling me a failure. You demanded I hand over $150,000 to fund his lifestyle. You mocked my independence and threatened to leave me homeless. And now the golden boy is broke, heavily penalized, and permanently banned from the most exclusive real estate in the city. All because he tried to steal from the very woman you thought was completely beneath you. Vivian shoved her chair back with such violent force that the heavy wooden legs shrieked against the marble floor before tipping backward and crashing loudly. She stood up abruptly. Her face was completely devoid of color, taking on a sickly ashen hue that made her expensive makeup look like a mask painted onto a ghost. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. The grand, untouchable matriarch, who had spent the entire evening looking down her nose at me, was suddenly gasping for air in her own fabricated nightmare. Chloe immediately spiraled into complete hysteria. She grabbed the lapels of Jamal's ruined, sweat-soaked dress shirt and shook him, her voice escalating into a frantic, ear-piercing scream. What is happening right now? Chloe shrieked, her perfectly manicured facade disintegrating into pure panic. You told me this was a sure thing. You said we were getting a luxury apartment tonight. How could you give them our last $25,000? We have nothing left. We are being evicted tomorrow morning. Jamal just sat there, staring blankly at the tablecloth, utterly unresponsive to his wife's screaming. He looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the arrogant golden child he had been just an hour ago. Vivian ignored the chaotic collapse of her son's marriage happening right next to her. She braced her trembling hands flat against the edge of the dining table and leaned forward. Her dark eyes were wide and frantic, darting across my face, as if searching for a punchline to a joke she could not comprehend. Her brain was violently rejecting the reality I had just laid out before her. She was desperately clinging to the false narrative she had constructed, the only narrative that allowed her to maintain her superiority. "Why are there police and armed guards at your rented apartment?" Vivian demanded, her voice shaking uncontrollably. It was no longer a command. It was a desperate, panicked interrogation. "You are a tenant. You are just a tenant, Maya. Tenants do not command federal security teams. Tenants do not have underground security bunkers. You are lying to me. Who is really paying for that apartment? What kind of illegal trouble are you involved in?" I looked at my mother, marveling at the sheer depth of her denial. Even when presented with the absolute, undeniable truth of her son's catastrophic failure, her first instinct was to accuse me of criminality. She would rather believe I was a criminal than accept that I was wildly successful. "I am not a tenant, Mom," I replied, my voice steady and echoing with unmistakable authority. "I have not been a tenant in years, and I am not involved in anything illegal. I am the sole owner of a commercial real estate empire. I did not rent that penthouse. I bought the entire high-rise tower. I bought the lobby, the elevators, the parking garage, and every single unit inside of it. And then I secured a highly lucrative contract to lease my top floor to the French government." Vivian shook her head rapidly, side to side, her expensive pearl earrings swaying wildly. "No. No, that is impossible. You do not have that kind of capital. You are a single woman. You dropped out of the family business plan. You walked away from our network. You could not possibly secure a high-rise commercial property without a man, or without our financial backing." Her words reeked of the exact misogynoir and toxic traditionalism she had weaponized against me my entire life. She fundamentally believed that a black woman could not achieve monumental wealth unless it was handed to her by a man, or filtered through her family's approval. "I secured it because I am smarter than you," I stated plainly, letting the blunt truth slice through her remaining delusions. "I built my private equity firm from the ground up while you were busy paying off Jamal's gambling debts and funding his failed crypto startups. I spent the last 10 years reading market trends, acquiring undervalued properties, and networking with international investors who care about actual returns, not social country club gossip. I did the grueling, exhausting work that Jamal always refused to do. I became the exact powerhouse you explicitly told me I could never be." Marcus stood up, his face a deep, furious red. He pointed a trembling finger at me across the table. "If you own the building, then you have the authority to call off those guards. You need to pick up your phone right now and reverse that penalty charge. That $25,000 is family money. It is Chloe and Jamal's survival fund. You cannot just sit there and let them steal it." I let out a short, cold laugh. "Steal it? They did not steal anything, Dad." Jamal gladly handed over his credit card and authorized that transaction to avoid being thrown into the back of a federal transport van. That money is the cost of his freedom. It is the stupidity tax he had to pay for listening to a mother who treats property laws like mere suggestions. I do not have the power to reverse a federal security breach fine, and even if I did, I absolutely would not lift a single finger to do so. Chloe burst into fresh, agonizing tears, burying her face against Jamal's unresponsive shoulder. "We are going to be on the street," she sobbed loudly. "We literally have nowhere to go. We have no money for a deposit on a new place. We cannot even afford groceries for the rest of the week." Marcus looked at his weeping daughter-in-law and his devastated son, and then he turned his blazing eyes back to me. "You have to help them, Maya. You are swimming in millions of dollars. You just threw down a black card for a birthday dinner. You can afford to fix this. You can buy them a new house tomorrow, and you would not even notice the money missing from your account. You have a moral obligation to protect your brother." The audacity was staggering. They had spent the entire evening attempting to extort me, insulting my race, degrading my independence, and orchestrating a home invasion. Now that their evil little scheme had completely backfired and left them destitute, they were pivoting effortlessly back to the black tax. They expected me to simply absorb their catastrophic failure and write a blank check because I possessed the financial capacity to do so. "There is no moral obligation here, Dad," I said, keeping my posture relaxed and perfectly composed. "You severed any obligation I had to this family the moment you brought a promissory note to my birthday dinner and threatened to leave me homeless. You made your bed. Now you can watch your golden boy lie in it." Vivian pressed her hands against her temples, her chest heaving as a terrifying realization began to take root in her mind. Her eyes darted from Jamal's ruined shirt to Chloe's tear-stained face, and finally rested on Marcus. "Marcus," Vivian whispered, her voice dropping into a hollow, trembling register of pure dread. "We cannot afford to bail them out this time. We remortgaged the house to cover Jamal's crypto losses last year. Our liquid assets are tied up in the new investment properties. If Jamal and Chloe are truly bankrupt and blacklisted—" She stopped speaking, but the unspoken truth hung heavily over the table. Vivian and Marcus had completely drained their own financial reserves trying to maintain the illusion of Jamal's success. They had leveraged their own home to keep the golden child afloat. They were relying on my $150,000 forced loan to save themselves from a looming financial collapse. I watched the horror dawn on my mother's face as she finally understood the full scope of the disaster. By sending Jamal to break into my property, she had not just bankrupted her son, she had effectively triggered her own financial ruin. "You need me," I observed, quietly leaning forward to make sure she heard every syllable. "You did not invite me here tonight to bring me back into the family fold. You invited me here because your own accounts are drying up and you needed a fresh victim to bleed dry. You thought you could terrorize me into handing over my savings so you could cover the gaping hole Jamal blew in your retirement fund." Vivian opened her mouth to deny it, but no sound emerged. The truth was written all over her terrified ash-white face. "You are a monster," Chloe choked out between heavy sobs, glaring at me with bloodshot eyes. "You are watching your own family drown, and you are smiling. I am not smiling because you are drowning, Chloe. I am smiling because for the first time in 32 years, I am finally free of the anchors trying to pull me under." I stood up from the table. I smoothed down the front of my tailored suit jacket, picking up my designer handbag with a graceful, unhurried motion. The contrast between my pristine composure and their absolute devastation was profound. I looked down at the four people who had dedicated their lives to making me feel small, inadequate, and obligated to serve their needs. They looked pathetic, broken, and entirely stripped of their false superiority. "I hope the $4,800 dinner was to your liking," I said softly, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "Because considering the severe lack of funds currently residing in your bank accounts, I highly doubt you will be eating this well ever again." I stood up, fully pushing my velvet chair back with a smooth, controlled motion that drew the eyes of every patron in our section of the dining room. I reached down and fastened the center button of my tailored vest. The crisp, deliberate movement felt like a gavel dropping in a courtroom. I smoothed the lapels of my jacket, looking down at the four people seated around the table. The physical height difference only amplified the absolute shift in power. I was no longer the obedient daughter shrinking under their judgment. I was the architect of their ruin, looking down at the wreckage. Vivian stared up at me, her mouth trembling, her eyes wide with a horrific realization that she could no longer deny. The arrogant matriarch who had spent 32 years dictating my worth was completely paralyzed. "You still cannot process it," I said, my voice echoing with a calm, terrifying authority. "You are sitting there watching your golden child weep into the tablecloth, and your mind is still desperately trying to find a way to make me the tenant. You are still trying to find a way to put me back in my place. So let me make this absolutely unequivocally clear for you, Mom. I leaned forward, resting my fingertips lightly on the edge of the table. I locked my eyes onto hers, ensuring there was nowhere for her to look away, nowhere for her to hide from the reality of her failure. "I do not rent that apartment," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with deadly precision. "I have not been a renter in nearly a decade. My private equity firm bought out that entire high-rise tower 3 years ago. I own the lobby you walked through. I own the parking garage. I own the elevators. I own the roof. And that specific penthouse unit you tried to steal tonight. I did not just move out of it. This morning I signed a multi-year, highly classified lease agreement." I handed the keys over to the French embassy. Marcus let out a sharp, choked gasp, his hand flying to his chest as if he had been physically struck. Chloe buried her face in her arms, her sobs echoing loudly over the quiet jazz music playing in the background. "That is right." I continued, my gaze sweeping over my father and settling coldly on my brother. "Your precious beloved golden child did not just take a crowbar to his sister's front door. He took burglary tools and attempted to forcibly breach the private secured residence of a high-ranking foreign diplomat. He tried to break into a designated safe house that is currently protected by armed federal security and international law." Jamal flinched violently at my words, curling further in on himself. He wrapped his arms around his torso, rocking back and forth in his chair like a terrified child. "You sent him to commit a federal crime," I said, turning my attention back to my mother. "You were so blinded by your own greed, so obsessed with putting me in my place and rewarding his incompetence, that you marched your favorite son straight into an international security trap. He is not just broke now. He is on a federal watch list. He is a documented security threat to a foreign embassy." Vivian tried to speak. Her lips moved, but her throat was completely dry. She reached a shaking hand out toward her water glass, but her fingers lacked the strength to grip the crystal. She knocked it over instead, sending a cascade of ice water spilling across the table and dripping onto Chloe's expensive designer shoes. Nobody even bothered to clean it up. "You thought you were so clever," I observed, watching the water soak into the linen. "You brought a promissory note to a birthday dinner. You thought you could orchestrate a hostage situation. You assumed that because I am a black woman who chose independence over blind loyalty to a toxic family, I must be vulnerable. You thought I was weak. You thought my silence over the years was submission. But my silence was strategy." I looked at Marcus, who was staring at the table with the defeated, hollow expression of a man who had gambled his entire life savings and lost everything in a single hand. "You wanted me to pay the black tax?" "Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, razor-sharp register. "You demanded that I sacrifice my credit, my home, and my future to carry the weight of a 34-year-old man who refuses to carry himself. You told me it was my duty. But the only duty I have is to protect the empire I built with my own 2 hands. I took the trauma you handed me, the identity theft, the verbal abuse, the constant suffocating disrespect, and I turned it into an impenetrable fortress." Chloe raised her head, her face a smeared, blotchy mess of ruined makeup and pure despair. She looked at Jamal, then looked at me. Her eyes filled with a sudden, sickening realization of her own predicament. She had married into this family believing she was securing a lifetime of luxury and ease. She had happily participated in my degradation, assuming she would reap the rewards of my forced labor. Now she was staring down the barrel of immediate eviction, bankruptcy, and a husband who was a documented federal security risk. "Please," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking as she reached a trembling hand across the table toward me. "Maya, please. I am sorry. We are so sorry. I will apologize for everything I said. Just help us. If we get evicted tomorrow, we will have to live in our car. Jamal cannot get a job with his criminal record, and now his credit is completely destroyed. You have millions. You own an entire building. Just give us one of the empty units. We will pay you back. I swear we will." I looked at my white sister-in-law, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the tears streaming down her face. "You do not have a home, Chloe," I replied, my tone completely devoid of emotion. "Because you tied your wagon to a man who expects the women in his life to do all the heavy lifting. You happily sat there 10 minutes ago and called me an unlovable, bitter stereotype. You mocked my independence, Well, my independence is the reason I am going back to a gated estate tonight, while you are going back to pack your bags in the dark. I do not have a single empty unit for you. Even if I owned 1,000 empty apartments, I would rather burn them to the ground than let you or your husband step foot inside one. Jamal finally lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale and sticky with dried sweat. He looked at me not with anger, but with the profound, devastating realization that he had completely destroyed his own life. You set a trap, Jamal croaked out, his voice hoarse and broken. You knew Mom would try to take the apartment. You knew she would send me. I did not have to set a trap, Jamal, I said calmly. I just stopped standing in your way. I stopped being your human shield. You and Mom have been operating under the delusion that your actions do not have consequences. You thought you could just take whatever you wanted from me because you shared my DNA. I simply let you walk through a door that belonged to someone much more powerful than you. You destroyed yourself. I just provided the venue. I picked up my designer handbag, slipping the strap gracefully over my shoulder. I looked at my mother one last time. Vivian was entirely broken. The grand illusion she had spent decades maintaining was reduced to a puddle of spilled water and a disgraced, weeping son. You told me I was a disappointment, Mom, I said, delivering the final crushing blow. You told me I was an embarrassment because I did not fit into your pathetic, small-minded vision of what my life should be. But look at you now. Look at your golden child. You leveraged your own home to pay for his failures, and now you are all going to sink together. I turned my back on the table. I did not wait for a response. I did not wait for the apologies, the begging, or the inevitable screaming that would follow once the shock fully wore off. I walked away, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, cutting through the heavy silence of the dining room. I walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the cool, refreshing night air. A sleek black luxury sedan was already idling by the curb, the driver standing at attention. He opened the rear door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the plush leather seat, the soft, quiet interior wrapping around me like a protective embrace. I looked out the tinted window at the glowing facade of the restaurant, leaving the wreckage of my toxic family entirely behind me. I had paid my dues. I had settled the score. The black tax was permanently revoked, and my empire was untouchable. Before my driver could put the car into gear, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant burst open once more. The devastation I had unleashed inside could not be contained within the dining room. It spilled out onto the pristine sidewalk of downtown Atlanta, a public exhibition of a family entirely shattered by its own greed. Chloe marched out first. Her designer heels snapped aggressively against the pavement, her posture rigid with absolute fury. Jamal stumbled out right behind her, reaching out blindly to grab her arm, pleading with her to lower her voice. Chloe whipped around with a velocity that caught him completely off guard. The sharp, resounding slap echoed through the cool night air. Her palm struck Jamal's cheek so hard his head snapped to the side. The remaining restaurant patrons leaving the valet stand stopped dead in their tracks, watching in stunned silence. Jamal did not raise a hand to defend himself. He just stood there, clutching his reddened face, looking like a beaten, terrified dog. "You are completely useless!" Chloe screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet street. "You are a fraud, Jamal. You dragged me into this family, promising me wealth and a legacy. You told me you were an entrepreneur. You told me your parents had generational wealth. But you are nothing but a broke, pathetic felon who just handed our absolute last $25,000 to federal security guards." Jamal tried to shush her, glancing frantically at the onlookers. "Chloe, please stop screaming. People are watching us." "Let them watch," Chloe shrieked, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. "Let everyone see exactly what you are. You cannot even pay the rent on the apartment we are being evicted from tomorrow. You just permanently blacklisted us from the entire city. You pushed this family straight into a dead end, and you dragged me down with you. I am done covering for your incompetence. I am done pretending you are a man when you cannot even provide for your own wife." The golden child had been stripped of his armor. The woman who had happily joined my family in mocking my independence was now publicly eviscerating her husband for his complete lack of it. Their marriage, built entirely on the fragile foundation of my parents' financial bailouts, was disintegrating right there on the curb. She cursed him, screaming that he had ruined her life and that she was a fool for ever believing he was anything more than a spoiled, worthless mama's boy. Then Marcus hurried out the doors. He left Vivian standing frozen in the restaurant lobby, completely unable to face the public humiliation. Marcus spotted my idling luxury sedan. The sheer desperation on his face replaced every ounce of the arrogant patriarch I had known my entire life. He sprinted toward my car, a 60-year-old man abandoning all sense of pride and social decorum. He reached the side of my vehicle and tapped frantically on the tinted glass of my rear window. I raised a single finger, signaling my driver to hold our position. I pressed the control button, letting the window slide down just a few inches. The cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of city rain and Marcus's sharp, panicked cologne. "Maya, wait!" Marcus gasped, gripping the edge of the window frame as if his life depended on it. "Please, Maya, you have to wait. Do not drive away." I looked at the man who had just spent the entire evening calling me a disgrace, threatening to ruin my credit, and demanding I sacrifice my future for the son who was currently weeping on the sidewalk. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and begging. The false pride that had dictated his every move for 3 decades was completely crushed into dust. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any warmth. "I already paid the dinner bill. We have nothing left to discuss." "You have to fix this," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with a pathetic, desperate edge. "Your mother is inside having a literal panic attack. She cannot even walk out here. You own the building, Maya. You hold the master lease with the embassy. You have to know the diplomatic staff or the security directors. You have connections. You can make a phone call right now and explain it was a massive misunderstanding. Tell them Jamal is your brother. Tell them he had the wrong address. You can get that federal security breach wiped from his record and get that penalty fine refunded. They will listen to a woman with your kind of power." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy. Less than 20 minutes ago, my power was an insult to him. My independence was a threat to his authority. Now my power was the only life raft he had left, and he was begging me to throw it to a man who had actively tried to sink me. "You want me to use my political and corporate capital to save a man who just showed up at my property with a crowbar," I stated flatly, ensuring he heard exactly how absurd his request sounded. "You want me to cash in personal favors with international diplomats to protect a brother who came to my home with the explicit intention of throwing my belongings onto the street." "I was wrong." Marcus choked out the words, tearing from his throat like broken glass. He bowed his head, staring down at the asphalt, completely lowering himself before me. "We were wrong. Your mother was blinded by her own stubbornness, and I was too weak to stop her. I admit it, Maya. We failed you. We took you for granted. We thought we could bully you into submission, and we made a catastrophic mistake. But please, I am begging you as your father, do not let your brother go to federal prison. Do not let this ruin his entire life." "He ruined his own life," I replied, showing him absolutely zero mercy. "You and Mom just handed him the match and told him to light the fire. You spent his entire life teaching him that he was untouchable, that the rules did not apply to him, and that there would always be a black woman willing to clean up his messes. Well, he finally hit a wall that my money and your excuses cannot tear down. Federal security does not care about your golden boy." Marcus gripped the window tighter, his knuckles turning white. "Maya, look at them. Chloe is leaving him. She is standing right there screaming that she is filing for divorce. We have no money left to pay for a criminal defense lawyer. If you drive away right now, you are sentencing your own blood to absolute destruction. Have some mercy." I looked past Marcus, watching Chloe flag down a taxi. She shoved her way into the back seat, slamming the door shut and leaving Jamal standing entirely alone on the sidewalk. Jamal did not even try to stop her. He just watched the cab drive away, looking like a man who had just realized his entire existence was a fraud. "Mercy is for people who show remorse before they get caught, Dad," I said, bringing my attention back to Marcus. "You are not sorry you abused me. You are not sorry you tried to steal my apartment or extort me for $150,000. You are only sorry that you picked a fight with a woman who had the ammunition to destroy you. Tell Mom to drink a glass of water and figure out her own housing situation. I am entirely done being your collateral damage. I pressed the button to roll the window up. Marcus had to quickly snatch his fingers away to avoid getting them caught in the glass. He stood there on the curb completely defeated, his shoulders slumped and his head bowed in utter humiliation. The patriarch who demanded absolute obedience was now nothing more than a broken man watching his only lifeline seal herself away behind bulletproof glass. Drive, I instructed my chauffeur. The heavy luxury sedan pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the restaurant, the screaming, and the shattered remnants of my toxic family shrinking in the rearview mirror. I settled back into the plush leather seat, watching the city lights blur past the window. The heavy, suffocating chain of the black tax that had dragged behind me for my entire adult life was finally permanently broken. Before my driver could even merge the luxury sedan into the bustling Atlanta traffic, a frantic, chaotic shape threw itself directly in front of the vehicle. My driver slammed on the brakes with a violent jerk, the heavy car coming to an abrupt halt just inches away from a catastrophic impact. I braced my hands against the plush leather seats, my eyes narrowing as I looked through the windshield. Vivian had finally emerged from the restaurant lobby. She was standing dead center in the middle of the street, her arms splayed wide across the hood of my car, like a desperate cornered animal. Her pristine high society image was completely obliterated. Her expensive silk dress was rumpled. Her carefully styled hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her makeup was a ruined, tear-streaked mess. Jamal was standing right behind her, shivering in the cool night air, looking over his shoulder as if he expected the federal guards from the embassy to appear from the shadows and drag him away. She began pounding her fists against the reinforced hood of the sedan, screaming my name so loudly I could hear her muffled voice through the thick, soundproof glass. "Madam," my driver said, his voice tense and deeply professional. "Should I contact the authorities to have them removed from the roadway?" I looked at the woman who had spent 32 years trying to break my spirit. She was not going to let this go. She was going to cling to the hood of my car, causing a massive public spectacle, screaming about how I owed them my life. She was going to play the victim until her very last breath. I realized that simply driving away was not enough. I had to sever the route completely. I had to leave them with absolutely nothing left to hold on to. "No," I told my driver, my voice eerily calm. "Unlock the doors. I will handle this." I opened the heavy car door and stepped out onto the damp pavement. The cool night breeze immediately caught the edges of my tailored jacket. I stood tall, the glow of the streetlights casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. Vivian practically lunged toward me, her eyes wide with a terrifying, toxic desperation. "Maya, you are not leaving!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "You cannot just walk away from us. If you think you are going to leave your brother to burn, you have another thing coming. You owe us. You are going to fix this embassy situation, and then you are going to pay off his debts. Because if you do not, I will take you down with us. I will ruin that pristine business reputation you are so proud of." I tilted my head, genuinely fascinated by the absolute depth of her delusion. "How exactly do you plan to do that, Mom?" Vivian smiled, a nasty, desperate, jagged expression that looked completely unnatural on her ruined face. "Your first LLC," she spat out triumphantly, revealing what she believed was her ultimate trump card. "The little design consulting company you started when you were 22. The one you thought you closed down before you moved into private equity. You forgot to fully dissolve the registration, Maya. Jamal found the active tax ID. We used it. We linked your precious corporate name to our home equity line of credit." Jamal flinched behind her, squeezing his eyes shut as Vivian proudly confessed to their staggering financial crimes right there on the street. "We took out a massive second mortgage on the family house using your company as the commercial guarantor," Vivian declared, her voice rising with hysterical, misplaced confidence. "We funneled the cash directly into Jamal's crypto accounts. It was a flawless plan. If the market bounced back, Jamal would be rich. If the market crashed, your company would be legally on the hook for the default. So you are going to pay his embassy fines and you are going to pay off that mortgage, because if you do not, the bank is going to come after your precious private equity firm for corporate fraud. You are tied to us, Maya. You will always be tied to us. She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the terror to finally strike my face. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to beg for a compromise, terrified that my pristine corporate empire was secretly anchored to her toxic sinking ship. Instead of panicking, I reached back into the open door of my sedan. I picked up my designer handbag from the leather seat. I unclasped the lock and reached deep inside my fingers, wrapping around the thick, heavy manila folder I had been carrying with me all evening. I had waited for the perfect moment to deliver this specific execution. I pulled the folder out. I did not hand it to her. I threw it directly at her face. The heavy folder struck Vivian in the chest with a sharp smack. It burst open on impact, scattering dozens of thick, legally binding documents, bank statements, and government-stamped letters all over the wet pavement at their feet. Jamal dropped to his knees instantly, his hands scrambling over the concrete to pick up the papers. His eyes scanned the bold red lettering at the top of the first page. The remaining blood drained entirely from his face. He dropped the paper as if it had physically burned him. Vivian looked down at the scattered documents, her triumphant smile completely melting away. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice suddenly small and trembling. "That is the bank foreclosure file," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute devastating clarity. "You honestly thought you could use the name of my old company to secretly mortgage your current house to play crypto roulette? You thought a woman who manages hundreds of millions of dollars in commercial real estate would not conduct a routine comprehensive audit of her own legacy LLCs. You thought I was stupid, Mom. You thought I was exactly as incompetent as the son you worship." I took a slow step forward, forcing Vivian to physically take a step back. "I knew about the fraudulent mortgage the very same week you and Jamal forged my signature on the guarantor application," I explained, watching the sheer, unadulterated terror violently seize control of her features. "But I did not stop you. I let you take the money. I let Jamal dump every single penny of your home equity into a volatile, unregulated crypto market that crashed spectacularly 3 months ago. I let you hang yourselves with your own rope." Vivian clutched her chest, her breathing turning into shallow, panicked gasps. You knew, and you let us lose the house." "I did not lose the house, Mom," I corrected her sharply. "You did. You gambled the roof over your own head to fund a 34-year-old man's delusions. And you committed federal identity theft to do it. Again." I pointed down at the papers scattered across the street. The bright blue seal of the federal government was clearly visible on the top document. "I did not just call the bank to clear my company's name. I continued, my tone dropping into a lethal, uncompromising register. I reported you to the FBI last week. I handed over the forged signatures, the IP addresses Jamal used to initiate the transfers, and the banking routes you used to launder the mortgage payout. I gave the federal investigators a perfectly wrapped, undeniable case of corporate fraud and wire theft." Jamal let out a sound of pure agony, burying his face in his hands right there on the pavement. He was already facing international security charges from the French embassy, and now he was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment for wire fraud. His life was entirely, unequivocally over. Vivian dropped to her knees right next to the scattered papers. Her hands hovered over the foreclosure notices, completely paralyzed by the catastrophic reality of her own actions. She looked up at me, her face contorted in an expression of absolute begging desperation. "Maya, please, Vivian," sobbed, the tears flowing freely now, stripping away decades of toxic pride. "Please, you cannot do this to us. We are your family. I am your mother. You cannot send us to prison. You cannot let them take the house. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do?" I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable resource. She had finally realized that the strong black woman she tried to exploit was not a mule meant to carry her burdens, but a force of nature entirely capable of destroying her. I checked the diamond watch on my wrist. "You need to go home, Mom," I advised, my voice completely devoid of any sympathy or warmth. "You need to go home right now and start packing whatever clothes you can fit into a suitcase. Because tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the bank is coming to seize that property. And they will not be coming alone. They will be coming with federal agents executing a seizure warrant for the fraud you committed." Vivian let out a piercing, devastated wail, clutching the damp documents to her chest as she rocked back and forth on the concrete. Jamal simply lay down on the street, curling into a tight, defeated ball, completely broken by the weight of his own consequences. I turned my back on them for the absolute last time. I stepped back into the warm, quiet sanctuary of my luxury sedan. The heavy door closed with a solid, definitive thud, shutting out the sounds of their weeping. Drive. I told my chauffeur, not looking back as the car pulled smoothly away into the city night. Vivian was not willing to let the physical barrier of a car door finalize her absolute defeat. She scrambled across the damp pavement, her ruined silk dress dragging through the scattered federal foreclosure documents. She threw her hands out, catching the edge of the heavy luxury door just before my driver could pull it completely shut. She collapsed onto her knees right there against the frame of the vehicle. The grand, commanding matriarch, who had spent over 3 decades ruling our family through intimidation and financial abuse, was now kneeling in the street, weeping uncontrollably. She looked up at me, her face a distorted mask of pure, unadulterated terror. "Maya, please," Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking as she grasped at the fabric of my tailored trousers. "You cannot do this. I am your mother. I gave you life. I carried you in my womb. You cannot turn your back on the woman who brought you into this world. God will punish you for abandoning your own blood. You have to save us. I am begging you on my hands and knees. Have a heart." Oh. I looked down at the woman gripping my clothes. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no residual guilt, no sudden surge of daughterly devotion, and certainly no fear of divine punishment. I reached down and calmly pried her manicured fingers off my suit jacket, removing her grip with the clinical precision of a surgeon removing a parasite. "You did not give me a life, Mom," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, hollow finality in the night air. "You gave me a debt. You expected me to spend my entire existence paying off the cost of my own birth. You weaponized the title of mother to justify treating me like a disposable asset. But biology does not grant you amnesty from accountability. You made your choices. Now you get to survive them." I stepped back fully into the plush leather interior of the sedan. But before I allowed my driver to close the door, I looked past my weeping mother. Standing under the grand illuminated awning of the restaurant was the general manager. He had stepped outside during the commotion, standing silently with a few remaining waitstaff watching the catastrophic collapse of my family with wide, stunned eyes. I caught his eye and raised my hand, giving him a crisp, polite wave. "Excuse me," I called out to him, my voice carrying clearly over the sounds of Vivian's sobbing. The manager immediately stood at attention, nodding respectfully in my direction. "Please pack up all the leftovers from table 4, I instructed, offering a sharp, completely devoid smile. "Make sure you wrap everything securely. The Wagyu steak, the truffles, all of it. Hand it to the people currently sitting on your sidewalk. They are going to absolutely need every single scrap of that food by tomorrow morning." The manager nodded vigorously, retreating immediately back into the restaurant to follow my exact orders. I turned my attention back to my driver, who was standing ready by the heavy door. "Close it," I commanded. The heavy reinforced door swung shut with a solid, definitive thud. The thick glass instantly severed the connection to the outside world. The frantic sounds of my mother's wailing and the chaotic reality of the Atlanta street were entirely muted, replaced by the profound, luxurious silence of the car's interior. "Take me home," I said softly. The vehicle pulled smoothly away from the curb. I did not turn my head to look out the rear window. I did not care to see Jamal curled up on the pavement or Vivian weeping over her scattered foreclosure notices. I kept my eyes focused entirely on the road ahead. The city lights washed over the tinted glass, casting brilliant, fleeting patterns across the dark leather seats. For the first time in 32 years, I took a breath that did not hurt. The crushing, invisible weight of the black tax, the suffocating burden of the strong black woman trope, and the endless parasitic demands of my family had been completely eradicated. I had not just survived their fire. I had forged my own empire in the flames, and I had used the ashes to bury them. The dark, rainy streets of Atlanta slowly dissolve, fading softly into a warm, golden glow. The camera glides smoothly across the polished hardwood floors of a breathtaking living room. The space is immaculate, designed with sophisticated quiet luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic, unobstructed view of the glittering city skyline. A modern fireplace flickers gently in the background, casting a soft ambient warmth over the rich velvet furnishings. I am sitting elegantly on the center sofa, exactly where this entire story began. My posture is perfectly relaxed, my shoulders free of any burden. The harshness of the restaurant confrontation is gone, replaced by a radiant, unbothered peace. I am wearing a stunning emerald green silk robe. My hair is perfectly styled, catching the warm light of the room. I hold a crystal wine glass loosely in my right hand, the deep red liquid catching the reflection of the fire. The camera pushes in very slowly, closing the distance until the frame captures the absolute serenity and sharp intelligence in my eyes. There is a massive misconception in our culture. I say, my voice smooth, intimate, and resonating with absolute authority. We are conditioned to believe that loyalty is defined by how much abuse we are willing to endure. We are told that sharing blood means signing a lifelong contract to be someone else's savior, even if it means drowning ourselves in the process. We are taught to shrink to sacrifice, and to smile while our own resources are violently extracted to build up men who refuse to build up themselves. I take a slow, thoughtful breath, looking directly into the lens. They expected me to be the mule. They expected me to carry the heavy, broken pieces of my brother's ego and my parents' staggering financial incompetence. They thought my success was a communal trough they could feed from whenever they pleased. They genuinely believed that because I was a black woman, my destiny was to be strong enough to endure their cruelty, but weak enough to obey their commands. A quiet, powerful smile touches the corners of my lips. It is a smile of total victory. But true strength is not about carrying toxic people on your back. True strength is knowing exactly when to drop them. It is knowing how to look at the people who gave you life and tell them that your life actually belongs to you. I did not just build a private equity firm. I built a fortress. I built boundaries so high and so heavily fortified that their manipulation could never reach me again. I shift slightly on the velvet sofa, holding the crystal glass up to the light. They wanted to leave me homeless on my birthday. They wanted to strip me of my dignity, my home, and my future. Instead, they walked blindly into a trap woven entirely from their own greed and entitlement. They lost their home. They lost their golden child to the federal justice system. They lost their false superiority. And they lost the only daughter who ever had the capacity to actually save them. I lift the glass to my lips, maintaining unbreakable eye contact with the camera. The silence in the room is heavy, rich, and deeply satisfying. I take one final slow sip of the dark red wine. I lower the glass, my expression perfectly calm, perfectly lethal, and perfectly free. And that I say softly, my voice ringing with total, unshakable finality, is how I took out the trash from my life. The screen cuts instantly to black.